Okay, so good morning to all of you. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Philippe Aghion, who has kindly accepted to do this interview with Anna and me for our Lisbon conference on competition. Professor Aghion is currently a professor at the Collège de France in SEAD and a visiting professor at the LSE. He has also held prominent academic positions at the UCL, Oxford University, MIT, and Harvard University, his alma mater for the PhD of economics. He has received multiple awards, and Professor Aghion's groundbreaking work, together with Peter Howitt on economic growth and innovation, has long been guiding academic research and policy design. So I could spend the whole time we have just on the highlights of Professor Aghion's extensive list of achievements. However, the idea is to have an open conversation where we will bring one of the most brilliant economics alive to the competition policy and enforcement realm. Here we will discuss the state of play in Europe regarding the equity challenges we face, and we'll touch upon the most prominent topics in the interplay between competition policy, innovation, green growth, and defense. So welcome, Professor Philippe Aghion. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with us.
Pleasure.
We are truly privileged to have the opportunity to hear your insights on some of the most relevant puzzles and challenges we face today. Indeed, we face troubling times. Nowadays, we live with the urgency of the climate crisis. We are experiencing unprecedented geopolitical tensions, and in this complex policy game abroad, Europe finds itself in a difficult spot. Not only do we have war returning to our continent, but we are also faced with vulnerabilities and dependencies that hinder our ability to react. These vulnerabilities were spelled out very neatly in both the Letta and the Draghi reports that were quite a wake-up call. A competitiveness roadmap or compass was drawn to restore Europe dynamism and growth. However, 1 year on Draghi's words, Europe is in an even harder place and moving too slow. While several measures have been implemented, we still have a long way to go. So, Professor Philippe Aghion, what's your diagnosis about Europe's vulnerabilities, and what, if anything, went wrong? Let us know about your thoughts.
So I think you're right. I mean, the diagnosis for Europe, after catching up with the US during the period between 1945 and the mid-80s, it's true that the per capita GDP of Europe has declined relative to the per capita GDP of the US as of the mid-late 80s, okay? And so my explanation, my view on that, and which is very much, the Draghi report as well, is that during the period 45 to late 80s, we were in a catching up growth mode. Where growth was mainly driven by, imitation. We rebuilt our capital stock thanks to the Marshall Plan, and we were catching up with the technological revolution that had taken place in the US in the 1920s, you see, thanks to the education, endowment that we have in Europe. So, but then, we needed to move from imitation-based growth to innovation-based growth, and that and we didn't have the proper policies and institutions in Europe to move towards frontier innovation. At the time when you had the IT revolution, you see, you had the IT, the biotech revolution in the US, and we did not know how to harness these revolutions in Europe because we didn't have the proper institutions. And that's where the Draghi report comes into play. Draghi denounces the lack of true single market. We have not truly achieved a single market because there is a lot of what we call gold plating. Each country adds its own regulation to the European regulations. Okay, so we don't have a proper single market. Then we don't have a proper financial ecosystem of innovation with venture capital, integrated capital market, institutional investors. We don't have what they have in the US, the equivalent of it in Europe. And we don't have in Europe the equivalent of the DARPA, of the Defense Advanced Project Agency, which is a very pro-competition way of doing industrial policy. We don't have the equivalent in Europe. So we need to work on all those things to be able to move away from currently we do incremental mid-tech innovation, to move towards high-tech frontier innovation.
It's a very interesting approach that you do. The economist David Evans recently spoke about this as the eurosclerosis. But I know that you describe yourself as a non-voluntary type of optimist economist. So is the window for corrective action still ajar, or have we allowed circumstances to advance beyond our reach?
My feeling, I am an optimist. I'm a fighting optimist. I'm not a Panglossian optimist. You see, I'm an optimist to things. Whenever there are things we can do, I am optimistic. I start becoming really pessimistic when I believe there is nothing we can do. Do you see what I mean? And I think there are things we can do. All what Draghi proposes are things we can do. And I know some people get discouraged because they think the Draghi report, only 14% of it has been implemented so far. And I think it's already a lot, actually. But I believe that a lot of it will be done a coalition of the willing approach. You see, I don't believe that everything will be implemented straight away, straight on by the 27 member states. I think it will be more like those who want to get things done, they get together and they initiate the process. For example, the single market for high tech, I think would be a few countries starting, and then other countries can join as they feel we should align on the max. Institutional investors the same way. You can have a subset of countries who decide together to push, to set up an integrated, more developed financial ecosystem of innovation. Similarly for the DARPA, I think we can have European equivalents of the DARPA, but it will be between countries that are most willing to engage in that, and then other countries can join anytime. So I believe very much in a coalition of the willing approach there. But I think there is a lot, because Germany now wants to invest. UK, which is no longer part of Europe, but still Starmer wants to do DARPA with us. He wants to do this kind, we can really work with Britain a lot. I think there are many new possibilities.
Okay, now Anna.
Thank you, Professor Aghion. And precisely digging in more into the innovation issue to which you have so extensively and brilliantly contributed to. What do you think is wrong with the innovation ecosystem in Europe? What do we need to fix? Where do we need to act?
I think, there are some, as I said, first, the single market is really, so anything that you can do towards a more integrated market will boost innovation. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is, as I said, we don't have the proper financial ecosystem. So an integrated, having an equivalent of NASDAQ in Europe, having institutional investors like they do in Sweden to emulate the Swedish example and extend it to other European countries to create institutional investors, despite the fact that we don't have fully funded pension system. That's what the Swedes have been able to do. I think we have to emulate that. The DARPA, you see, there was this Bocconi report who says that the European Innovation Council is not at all a DARPA because it doesn't work like a DARPA. We need really to create the kind of DARPA where the money comes from the center, but then you have team leaders coming from academia or industry and they elicit competing projects. We need really in Europe to adopt the view that you can have a pro-competition industrial policy. We can reconcile properly designed industrial policy with competition policy, which has to evolve itself. You see what I mean? That's what they do in China. That's what they do in the US. They have a competition-friendly industrial policy. And we need to do the same in Europe. So that's something where really we can improve enormously. And on research, we had this experience in France of the Laboratoire d'Excellence, where we financed with international jury, we selected excellence laboratories. And the excellence laboratories had contracts with neighboring industries, and it boosted frontier innovation, breakthrough innovation in industries that were close technologically and geographically to the Laboratoire d'Excellence. I think this experiment that worked very well, we should push it EU. with, for example, an ERC. You have the European Research Council. It finances individuals. We could imagine an extension of the European Research Council that finances laboratories, you see, exactly like we did with the French Laboratoire d'Excellence. And I think that would be a big booster of frontier innovation as well, to have a much more better coordination between basic research and frontier innovation by industry. And I think in all those dimensions, we can make big progress.
You refer to the ARPA models in general as a good example of reconciling industrial policy with competition policy. Can you share your thoughts on what role do you see for competition and competition policy in this competitiveness agenda?
No, so my feeling is that, the problem with competition policy in Europe is what competition policy was a lot designed. Let me get some, was a lot designed as an integration tool. It was economics for political purposes as well. We wanted to make sure that Europe would be integrated. And so the idea is that you could never be dominant in your own country. You see what I mean? Because competition policy was designed to make sure that European countries would cooperate, which was again a very noble objective to pursue, you see. But it was very much a tool for integration. And also there was very much this view that, if you believe in competition policy, you have to dismiss any ambition of industrial policy, because industrial policy by nature gets in the way of competition policy, that somehow any form of industrial policy puts a bias on competition, you see, leads to biased competition. And in fact, we know that's not necessarily the case with DARPA, for example. We know you can design industrial policy that can be pro-competition. So there was very much a very static view also. The competition policy in Europe was very much market definition, market share. We look just at your market share. We don't look at whether or not a merger and acquisition will stifle future entry and future innovation. It was very much static. And in fact, it's true also in the US to some extent. I mean, my colleague, Richard Gilbert, has written a book, saying, showing that, also in the US, competition policy is too static, not enough dynamic, not enough saying, are you inhibiting future entry or future innovation or not? Rather than just look at market share. And that's what I think competition policy in Europe has to evolve towards more forward-looking, more innovation-looking competition policy, and also a competition policy that would tolerate smartly designed industrial policy, which is also on its end. Industrial policy was done, for example, in France, very much like Colbertist, very top-down and government picking the winners. And we know that you can design industrial policy which is not done that way. And so you see, competition policy has to evolve, but also the industrial policy has to evolve towards a more, competition-friendly industrial policy. And then the two can marry much better.
Indeed, and I think we've, for the past maybe a decade or 2 decades, we have been moving at the EU level in terms of competition policy towards a much more innovation-centric approach. So I believe that probably you agree that this is a good development that we should further.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will tell you something. Europe has fantastic assets. We have fantastic researchers. Breakthrough innovations worldwide, they cite a lot European research, and the problem is that European research doesn't translate in breakthrough innovations done in Europe. But we have very good research in Europe. We have very good mathematicians, engineers, computer science, biologists. We are very good. So we have to harness that power. In addition, we have, Europe is democracy, freedom and democracy more than ever. It starts and ends in Europe. But we are that's where it is. I mean, democracy, we are, the best, let's say, the best, we say hallmark of, freedom and democracy is in Europe, okay? And also Europe, the social model, we are doing much better than the US on social model, and China. In Europe, we have, the more advanced thoughts about how to reconcile innovation-based growth and protection and inclusiveness is in Europe. And finally, the green, on green innovation. I know the Chinese do a lot of green innovation as well, but the concern for green and environment is, more than anywhere else in Europe. So Europe, has a lot of assets, and we need to harness these assets, but we need to modernize our social model. We need to do a bit like the Denmark did. I mean, to have a labor market which is both very dynamic and flexible and protective at the same time. We need to find new ways to adapt, and to also not have too many regulations. We need the good regulation, but not too many regulations, which stifles competition. We know, for example, in AI, if you have too many regulations, the large incumbents know how to cope with the regulations, but the potential entrants don't know how to cope with them.
It's good that you mentioned the green innovation, because Professor Aghion, in this race towards growth and competitiveness, one thing where we cannot afford is to fail in the green transition. Yet the perception of policy leaders in developing and also some of developed countries is still often dominated by reluctances towards the green agenda for fears of jeopardizing their country's growth potential. So you have highlighted that the debate around green growth has been oversimplified and detached from the innovation factor, creating a misguided preference for postponing intervention. What can be done, in your own words, turn on the private green innovation machine? And are we a little too late?
So in fact, it's true that, there's been a lot the way, the degrowth debate. It's true that global warming has a lot to do with growth. I mean, if you look at the evolution of temperature, temperature starts, rising fast exactly at the time of the first industrial revolution. The temperature curve looks very much like the Madison curve, describing the evolution of world GDP since the early 2000 years. And so I believe very much that global warming has a lot to do with growth. And of course, my conclusion is not that we should have degrowth, because we know what degrowth means for developing countries. It means famine and poverty. I know that growth is what took developing countries out of poverty, and I don't want and reduce global inequality enormously, by the way. And so I don't want to interrupt that, but what I want that we can make it greener. But you see that the problem is that firms that have innovated in dirty technologies in the past, they don't spontaneously move into clean technologies. You need to redirect technical change, firms' innovation towards green, and that you do with a mixture of carbon pricing, carbon tax. But not only carbon tax, green industrial policy. And there again, you see the role of smart industrial policy. And you need a combination of the two. In the US, they had the IRA. I know now they are shy, they are moving away from it. But in China, they have green industrial policy. And we need to have in Europe both the carbon pricing and the green industrial policy. And it's a bit like the carrot and the stick, if you want. And one is not enough, you see. We need both. And all my work has been there to say that we need both legs. Why? Because you have both an environmental externality and you have knowledge externality. Precisely the fact that when I innovated a lot in dirty technology in the past, I have past dependence, and I tend to continue innovating a lot in the future. So that's a knowledge externality. And so when you have two externalities in public economics, you need two instruments, and the two instruments we need are, carbon tax and green industrial policy, and we need to have them hand in hand. In Europe, we did too much of carbon tax, carbon pricing, not enough of green industrial policy. Whereas maybe in the US, they did too much of the other thing. They didn't do enough carbon tax and too much industrial policy. I believe we need both.
You also argue that unilateral action can still pay off. Can you tell us why?
Sorry, which action?
Unilateral. In terms of one country, for example, Europe, does it still make sense for Europe to?
I think it does. I think it does, because China is now doing a lot of green innovation. We should not miss the race. So anyway, we need to compete with them, and we need to also be good in green, and we have a big market, a big demand for it. So we are very good. We have the scientists for that. So I think, like AI, we need to be part of the green revolution. So because that will be one of the big sectors also to provide new jobs. So just from a pure industrial policy point of view, we should not miss it. Exactly the way we should not miss the AI. So we would kill two birds with one stone. We would create new jobs, and we will also, help fight global warming.
Professor Aghion, in this sustainability debate, competition enforcers are being often faced actually, with claims that competition is an obstacle to sustainability. And this is a question that you address in your recent paper with Roland Benabou, Rolf Martin, and Alexandra Houle, in which you investigate whether product market competition is clean or dirty. Can you take us through your results and what policy
Yes. I want just to say, if you're in an environment where consumers have a demand for green innovation, then competition induces you to innovate greener. Why? Because I don't want to lose consumers to a competitor if I don't innovate green. I am in an environment where consumers want green. So I don't want to lose my consumers by not innovating green, even if I'm not myself pro-green a priori, you see. So it's the combination of having an economy where consumers have a demand for green and competition in such an environment. Competition reinforces firms' incentive to innovate green. You understand? Because otherwise you lose your consumers to the competitor.
Maybe, Professor Philippe, what's the role of competition agencies when it comes to assess mergers? What are the risks that you see when it comes to merger and acquisition for sustainability?
Yeah. But I think they should look, into that. I mean, they should stop just looking at market share and look at innovation, in particular green innovation. You see, we go back to the point I was making before that there are two, agencies are too static in their way to assess. They are too static in the way to assess, merger policy. And so that's the thing. They should look whether or not a merger and acquisition inhibits innovation, in particular green innovation. That's what we should. That would be a revolution. And they should also be more tolerant towards industrial policy, which is green industrial policy. That's what I would have to say.
So, Professor, allow me to wrap up our interview with another crucial and timely topic, which is AI and its interplay with public policy. You have recently published, together with different co-authors, several papers on AI, and there you raise a red flag, warning that AI may inhibit growth if combined with inappropriate competition policy.
Yes,
Can you share with us your views on your estimates regarding the potential impact of AI in growth and productivity, and what role is there for competition policy?
Yeah. The thing is that AI has a big growth potential because AI automates tasks both in the production of goods and services and in the production of ideas. But the problem is the lack of competition. We saw that with IT. With the IT revolution, you had the emergence of superstar firms, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Walmart, okay? And initially they pushed growth. They boosted aggregate growth in the US. But eventually, because they expanded through merger and acquisition unboundedly, they ended up inhibiting new entry. You see what I mean? And we don't want the same to happen with AI. And the problem is that in the upstream segments of the AI value chain, like cloud, for example, you have three main firms: Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, I think, are the three main players in the cloud. So our worry is that in the same way as inappropriate adaptation of competition policy to the IT revolution led to a growth decline following the growth upsurge, we would have the same with AI, that somehow the fantastic growth potential of AI would be inhibited by inappropriate competition policy.
Well, Professor.
So therefore what we need is open source. We need to extend the Digital Market Act to the whole value chain of AI, including the cloud. And we need on regulations not to have too many regulations, because as I said before, too many regulations, the large incumbents know how to cope with them, and the new potential entrants, they don't.
Well, Professor Aghion, I would say that we have to have hope for the future and for the role of competition policy in the future. Thank you once again for having joined our Lisbon conference. I think
Thank
it was
you
a
so much.
wonderful talk with you. and for leaving us with your terrific insights and thoughts. And I hope to see you someday here in Lisbon in person.
I'm looking forward to it. All the best.
Professor Aghion.
Thank you, Professor Aghion.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.